Assassin's Creed Valhalla is my favorite Assassin's Creed, which is saying something considering this is a series that spans 23 games. It builds on the already excellent RPG foundations laid by both Origins and Odyssey, but with meaningful improvements that iron out many of the frustrations I had with those games. Case in point, not once during the 60-hour story was I told to stop and level up a bunch before I could take on the next quest. That also means that Ubisoft isn't selling optional experience boosts either, thank God. What really stands out to me, though, is how much better Valhalla is at telling an engaging story that twists and turns according to my decisions. Valhalla does a great job of introducing characters, concepts, and themes, and then forcing me to decide how Eivor, the main character, relates to them. Set during the Viking invasion of England, the story follows Eivor and her adoptive brother Sigurd, two fierce Norse warriors chasing glory. Like Odyssey, Eivor can be played as either a man or a woman, but what's great is that you can now switch between them freely to test which one suits you, instead of being locked into that choice from the outset. Whichever Eivor you play as, the story unfolds mostly the same way though. Sigurd was supposed to be made the local king, but the unification of Norway under King Harald leaves him two choices: bend the knee or leave. Unwilling to give up his dream of ruling, Sigurd convinces Eivor and much of his clan to abandon Norway and sail to England so that they can violently carve out a new future. The anchor of this story is my settlement called Ravensthorpe, which expands slowly over time as I gather new resources and construct new buildings. Like Dutch's camp in Red Dead Redemption 2, the settlement is my home base that I return to frequently between quests. New buildings unlock new upgrades like a forge so I can enhance my equipment, or a brewery so that I can host feasts that give me a temporary buff to my stats. As the settlement expands, it draws new characters, side quests, and even the opportunity for romance. Most of the story is concerned with what's happening outside of the borders of my settlement, however. In order to cement a permanent place in England, Eivor and Sigurd have to negotiate alliances with the various Viking tribes and the occasional Saxon king. This is all centered around the alliance map, where I choose which region I want to venture to, participating in a somewhat self-enclosed series of quests in order to win the favor of whichever faction happens to be there. It does take a while before it all starts to come together, but Ubisoft does a great job of juxtaposing my relationships with Sigurd and the rest of Raven Clan with the much more epic sagas as I wage war on Pix with the legendary Halfdan Ragnarsson, establish puppet kings with Ivar the Boneless, or just trade veiled threats with Aelfred, King of Wessex. All the while, dialogue choices poke and prod the rigidity of Norse culture and traditions with surprising nuance. It's hard to explain without spoiling specific moments, but Valhalla has some wickedly knotted moral conundrums. There were a dozen or more times I stared at dialogue choices, completely stumped over which option was right.
Pigs have to eat, my lady. The trouble is, it takes a lot to sate their hunger. Only a matter of time before they finish those and sniff around for fresher meat.
And the smell of pig shit after this? Ooh.
My God! Get me out of here! Please!
There are still some moments where Valhalla feels like a bad Game of Thrones episode, though. Entire armies show up undetected at a moment's notice, and characters will inexplicably change sides in a conflict just to reveal that they're actually a part of the Templar Order, the overarching villains of the Assassin's Creed mythos.
You're attacking Brad? I thought you were friends.
Nah, there are not enough resources for both of us to...
These moments are thankfully few and far between, and ultimately this is a game about warring cults reliving historical simulations to uncover mythological artifacts in the modern day. I mean, a bit of cheese is to be expected, but, and I can't believe I'm about to say this, Valhalla even makes Assassin's Creed's sloppy overarching meta-narrative interesting again. Without spoiling anything, the final 2 hours are a whirlwind of revelations with implications that stretch back all the way to the first game. God help me, I actually want to see what happens next. The Viking fantasy is great, but there are times when Ubisoft pulls punches in a way that is so frustrating and clumsy. Let's look at raiding, for example. So to gather resources and expand my settlement, I have to pillage Christian monasteries dotted along the various riverways of England's different kingdoms. The first few times I did this, it was exhilarating. My soldiers stormed the town, hurling torches onto thatched-roofed cottages, slaughtering the guards, breaking windows, shattering pots and crates, and even helping me kick down doors to get more valuable loot. But God help you if you kill an unarmed clergyman, even by accident. Kill too many and it's game over. Burning their entire lives to the ground, however, totally okay. Now, I am not saying that Valhalla should gleefully reward you for butchering Christians, but including a hard rule against it feels like the developer intervening to wag a finger in my face. It's even stranger when I start a quest with a Saxon lord who completely ignores the fact that I pillaged every church in his lands on the way to meet him. It makes raiding feel like a shallow feature clumsily stitched to the rest of the game rather than something incorporated into and accounted for by the story. Some of these issues would be a lot more frustrating if combat weren't so much fun. The system is similar to Odyssey's in a lot of ways, but way more satisfying. For example, I can now dual wield any two weapons, changing my combat style while also giving me access to special moves unique to my offhand weapon. Playing on a harder difficulty, I immediately favored the traditional axe and shield for the extra defense, but then I unlocked an ability on Valhalla's skill tree that let me dual wield two-handed weapons. What a game changer! It's also hard to overstate just how gnarly some of the combat finishing moves are. I've repeatedly knocked enemies down and impaled them on their own spears, or chopped their hands off as they raised them to defend against the axe I was about to lodge in their skull. There's even one where Ivor sticks an axe in a guy's face and then punches his head off. It's exactly what you'd hope for in a game about Vikings. Of course, stealth is still an option, but it's quickly becoming the most antiquated part of Assassin's Creed, if only because so little of it has changed. Valhalla brings back some cool features like being able to blend into crowds to avoid guards and creating distractions to draw them away, but I'm often frustrated by how shitty the AI continues to be. At least Valhalla is more willing to let me forego stealth entirely in all but a few quests. Being a sneaky Viking just doesn't feel that appropriate anyway. Fortunately, Ivor has more tools than just the weapons she wields. While exploring, special books can be found that unlock new abilities, like being able to set your weapon on fire or a harpoon that can yank enemies off of cliffs. This, coupled with a skill tree that recalls Path of Exile, and by that I mean hundreds of nodes that offer incremental stat boosts mixed with bigger ability unlocks, makes customizing Ivor feel deeply satisfying. Of course, this all feeds back into the open world exploration, which largely remains untouched from Odyssey, save for a few key improvements. Yes, the map is still littered with icons in typical Ubisoft fashion, but you can, and totally should, turn that all off in the options so that you can just explore without signposts everywhere. Most of the stuff you'll find is new equipment and treasure you can take back home or use for upgrades, but I also found hidden caves with challenging puzzles, secret boss battles, and weird little one-off quests that are often bizarre and sometimes hilarious. Instead of a checklist of things to do, it feels like an organic world that I actually want to fully explore.
Staggering already.
These little improvements go a long way in making Valhalla more inviting and fun than Odyssey. Assassin's Creed's transformation into a full-blown RPG has not been the cleanest one, especially as features like stealth feel left to stagnate while other aspects get so much better. But Valhalla succeeds on so many levels, it's easy to forgive the times when it doesn't. It's an enormous game, and it'll probably take me another 20 hours to finish everything I still haven't completed. Honestly, I can't wait.